The lunar module that landed astronauts on the moon in the 1960s was sometimes thought of a miracle based on its ugly design. So why are moon conspiracists using this flimsy looking design as proof that the moon landings were fake? Why did the lunar module look the way it did? That's what we're looking at on this Halloween edition of Vintage Retrospekt. Hello, I'm Chad, your host for Vintage Retrospekt, a nostalgic place where I can talk about the Apollo moon questions you never asked. The lunar module, which was the landing part of the Apollo spacecraft stack that was launched by the Saturn V rocket for Apollo 10 through 17, most notably the actual moon-bearing missions. So before we answer the question of why it looked scary, we need to set the stage. So the spacecraft was designed and built by Chief Engineer Thomas J. Kelly of Grumman Aerospace. The fact that this project was running over budget and far behind schedule resulted in the Apollo 8 mission to only be able to carry the command and service module to go to the moon. So why was the lunar module so ugly looking? Ugly being subjective here, and it depends on your point of view, and I know some of my audience has worked on the spacecraft before, and it was actually the most beautiful contraption ever. Practicality and necessity were the objective here. Well, what does this mean? Well, for those new to spaceflight history, we need to understand the fact that the LEM wasn't built to look cool. It was built to actually work in space. And the engineers were not only running out of time, but also had to solve two big problems in spaceflight: solar heat and micrometeorites. Since aerodynamics were not a concern on the moon, this gave engineers some wacky freedom to use very lightweight and unaesthetically pleasing materials as the thermal blanket to protect against solar radiation punching through. For context, let's start with the bottom of the lunar module, which was a separable piece called the descent stage. This stage looked funny because of the gold wrinkled outer skin, and it looked cheap and dangerous. Except it really wasn't. This stage only needed to be used for landing once, so careful consideration was used to determine what they needed to shave off for weight, since every ounce saved equaled 100 pounds of saved fuel. This gold foil was actually called Captain with a mylar film coating, and it was wrinkly because it would reflect the harsh sunlight and many directions without the sun punching through just one angle of the foil. The insulation was intentionally crumpled by hand to minimize the solar contact points that might bleed heat in between the layers. Let's move up to the ascent stage, also the stage where the two astronauts stand. This was more or less designed in two main parts. The crew cabin core, which is shown here, looks typically what a spacecraft should look like. It looks sturdy and heavy. The outer shell was aluminum, about the thickness of a soda can, but it had areas that it was as thick as 3 soda cans. Also, it had plenty of window casings, ribs, and spacers for structural strength. The ascent stage does have extra protection on the outside in the form of micrometeorite shielding. Since this module didn't need aerodynamic features in the vacuum of space, the thing worked so well it kept the crew of Apollo 13 alive. So it even worked better than it was designed to. Then we have to consider that the LEM was made by slide rules and not CAD and CNC machines. Then after Apollo 11, they figured out how to shove a car in it as well. Only 15 LEMs were built for the Apollo program, stretching over 20 states, including Nebraska. The first named LEM to officially be tested and flown in a crewed environment for the Apollo mission was called the Spider. The show From the Earth to the Moon, which is episode 5 in that series, is a really good example showing the development of this lander and its maiden manned voyage on Apollo 9. And of course, for Apollo 11, the lander was named Eagle. Realistically, the lunar module looked fake to not be fake, if that makes any sense. If we were to fake a moon landing, we would have spent the money to build a cool looking and sturdy spacecraft. Of course, function over form wins in the race to the moon, and that's all that matters. So do you think the lunar module is scary looking? Let me know in the comments, and also if you'd like to see more Apollo content in the future. Also, don't forget to subscribe so that others can be spooked about the looks of the lunar lander during this Halloween weekend. I am your host, Chad, and I will see you out on the launch pad.